Right.
Here's Jim. All right, well, let's call the meeting to order at 7:05. This is a special meeting of the Board of Finance with special guest Barry Bernabe. Is that pronounced correctly?
Yes.
Bernabe?
Yeah.
Okay. Plus members of the Board of Finance and our treasurer and our finance director. The gang's all here. We don't have, though, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anna Ryder, who's a regular member of the board, isn't here tonight. So I entertain a motion from somebody to nominate an alternate to serve.
I'll nominate Diane
Okay.
Linderman.
Second.
Andy seconds. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Any abstentions? Diane, you're up. I don't have, well, I hope you all know what the purpose of the meeting is. We have hopefully agreed in a series of Board of Finance meetings to the expenditures for the coming fiscal year, and now we have to figure out how to pay for them. And we have a couple of projects coming up. One is the Senior Center, and the other is the Region 18 renovations, both of which, in different orders of magnitude, require significant dollars. And Barry has been retained by the town to help us think through at least the Senior Center funding, but I think your charts also encompass the Region 18.
Right.
So that's all I have to say, and let me just turn the meeting over to you.
May I ask a clarification question? Are you also the advisor for the schools?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Just for the town.
Yeah.
So we used some information provided to Martha for all their debt scenarios that we tried to incorporate into the analysis here.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening to everyone. I think everyone has a handout of the presentation. Again, my name is Barry Bernabe. I work at Phoenix Advisors as the town's municipal advisor. And just on page 2 is just some bullet points as to what a municipal advisor does for a municipality. You know, we assist towns, regional school districts, sewer authorities in kind of planning for capital projects. So if you're looking to borrow, you know, try to put together some debt scenarios. That's kind of what the purpose of the presentation is tonight, to kind of show your existing debt plus the proposed debt service and how it's going to impact the town in various options, because state law allows a lot of flexibility as to how you want to structure debt service that we'll touch on as we go along. Part of the process, too, is guiding the community through the rating process. So just like all of us, we have a credit score. When we get a mortgage or an auto loan, a municipality has a bond rating. And the good news for the town of Old Lyme is that the town has the highest bond rating possible, AAA. So at any given time, the town will be allowed to borrow at the lowest possible interest rate. Same as, say, Greenwich, Connecticut, or you know, Wilton, Westport. So it's something to be very, very proud of. And, you know, we monitor the town's existing debt for any refinancing opportunities. So before we get into the debt analysis, there's kind of 3 major areas that we want to touch on. But just quickly, on page 3 is just a map of Connecticut that I highlighted, just some of the communities, or all of the communities, frankly, that Phoenix Advisors acts as a municipal advisor to.
And those are in yellow?
Yes, those are in yellow. So
that you got a pretty good clientele in Connecticut.
I like to think so. Yeah, you know, we don't have all the towns in Connecticut, but we work with a wide range. You know, from communities as large as Stamford, Danbury, Waterbury.
And let me ask you whether you've worked with Old Lyme in the past.
I have. In fact, we did a bond refinancing for the town several years ago when interest rates were super low. Mm-hmm. We actually took what's called the traditional bond issue and refinanced it with a bank loan. So municipalities have the option to do a bank loan at times. But, you know, when you go for a bank loan, you don't always get the lowest possible interest rate. When you do a traditional bond issue, which involves a lot more work and is a lot more expensive, so you have to weigh the two. Typically, when it's a larger borrowing, you're better off doing the traditional bond issuance process. You pay your bond counsel, you pay for a rating fee, but you get a much lower interest rate. But if it's a small amount and you just need money pretty quick, sometimes we reached out to different banks and you save a lot in issuance costs, probably not the lowest interest rate. You have to just weigh the two options. Typically there's three topics to touch on before we look at debt scenarios. And the first one is the overall level of interest rates. So if you look at page 4, it's a plot of the U.S. Treasury, the 10-year U.S. Treasury bond. Now, this is the benchmark for all long-term borrowing costs. I know it's a little bit busy, but there's quite a story on page 4, I think. So this chart goes back 55 years. It goes back to 1970. And you can see on the left-hand side, that green circle, is when long-term rates peaked in 1981 at the 10-year was yielding 16%. It's amazing. Over that period of time, interest rates bounced around a little, but basically went down, hit an all-time low when COVID started in March of 2020, and the 10-year yield was under 0.5%. So it's amazing how low interest rates have gone over that period of time. However, on the far right-hand side, you can see that since COVID, interest rates have gone up quite a bit. Now, from a historic perspective, they're nowhere near where they were in 1981, but they are higher than where they were several years ago at their all-time low. And you can see that again on the right-hand side. I mean, the federal government pumped a lot of relief funds into the economy, caused inflation, and until I think we see inflation start to go down, you're going to see interest rates stay at that kind of level where they are now. But nobody knows for sure where they're going to go, but the consensus is the Fed seems to be holding off on any interest rate cuts until they see inflation come down. So this long-term rates, if you look at page 5, it's a plot of the federal funds rate, which is short-term interest rates. So when a municipality borrows, typically, though not all the time, they start with a short-term ban issue to get the project going, get money in the bank, and then once the project's nearly complete and you have your arms around the final cost, you do a permanent financing of that short-term note. But if you're confident that you're going to get the project done in an appropriate period of time, some municipalities jump right into a permanent financing or a bond issue. What's interesting to me on page 5 is if you look at the middle of the page, several years ago, during COVID, the Fed controls short-term rates. They push short-term rates to 0. And you can see that red line in the middle of the page is at 0. So short-term borrowing costs back then were frankly very close to 0. You could borrow money for free, basically. But your interest income was very low too. Your investment rates were low. Now the Fed has pushed up short-term rates dramatically on the right-hand side. So short-term borrowing costs are much higher now than they were several years ago. However, your investment income is much higher now. Short-term interest rates are higher, so banks are paying more. The State Treasurer's Investment Fund is paying more.
Now, these are not actual short-term rates. This is the Fed funds rate.
Yes, Fed funds rate.
So that's different than like
but
SOFR plus a spread or something like that, right?
Yeah, but bank deposits and short-term money market funds are based off of this metric. So money market rates have gone up quite a bit, and I would assume that the town's interest income has gone up quite a bit since short-term rates have gone up.
If managed properly, yes.
If managed properly, right. So just an example of this. So if the town was to borrow, here's a recent 10-year bond sale for the town of Griswold that we did about a month or so ago. And you can see there's a lot of demand for municipal issues in Connecticut. On page 6, you can see all the bidders that came in. So the town of Griswold, which is rated AA, was able to borrow money at 10 years for a rate of a TIC, or a true interest cost, of 2.73, 2.74%. So even though that other chart I showed rates have gone up, that's still not a bad rate at all to borrow for 10 years. Now to show you how upside down today's world is, so that was a 10-year bond issue, 2.74%. If we look at the next page, we see a 1-year note for the town of Wolcott, Connecticut. So typically, short-term rates are lower than long-term rates. However, Wolcott borrowed for 1 year. You can see that their net interest cost, or their borrowing rate, was basically 3.46, 3.47. So it costs the municipality more to borrow for 1 year than it does for 10 years. It costs the municipality more to borrow for 1 year than it does for 20 years. That yield curve is inverted. Things are kind of a little upside down right now.
Why?
I think it's because the inflation is high because the federal government pumped a lot of money into the economy.
And so people are assuming the inflation will come down and the Fed rate will come down, and that's why they're willing to basically lend at lower interest rates for a longer time period.
Right. I think you're right. So people perceive long-term that those short-term rates will come down. That's why they're willing to lock in or lend money at such a low rate, below short-term rates. It's a little upside down. It's typically not like that. But the story here is interest rates, short-term rates are high, long-term rates are really not that bad. The second factor, so we talked about interest rates, the second factor is your bond rates, what I call our credit score. That's great. Got that up. So there's two rating scales. On the left-hand side is Standard & Poor's, and on the right-hand side is Fitch ratings. There's actually another one called Moody's, which I don't have here, but they're all very similar. The higher your rating, the lower the borrowing cost. Town of Oline is rated AAA, so you will always borrow at the lowest possible cost. So what factors go into determining that bond rating? There's basically 5 major factors. You look on page 9. The first assessment category they have is management practices. They like to see that you have a seasoned finance director. They like to see a board of finance that is well disciplined, puts together structurally balanced budgets, generates surpluses each year. A problem, I've been doing this for 30 years in Connecticut, and I see a lot of communities that for whatever reason are challenged a lot with their finances. And I think a big part of it is nobody wants high taxes. And a lot of times when a community or there's a mayor in a certain community, they'll say, listen, we're not going to raise taxes. And the finance person says, well, wait a minute, our expenses have all gone up. We have to raise taxes. And they go, well, no. If we collect 97% of our taxes, let's assume we collect 100%. If we only get $100,000 in investment income, assume we're going to get $500,000 in investment income. If the state only gives us $1 million, assume we're going to get $2 million. So all of a sudden the budget looks like it's balanced. And then when the end of the year comes, none of those things come to fruition and there's a deficit. And that kind of snowballs over time. So management practice is very important. They like to see discipline. Number 2 is the economy and demographics. You don't have a lot of control over this. This takes generations to change. But if you're a wealthy community with good demographics, if you're Greenwich, Connecticut, you're going to have a much better starting point than you would if you're Bridgeport or New Haven or Hartford. And then number 3 and 4, you have direct control over 2, financial performance, your ability to maintain adequate reserves. When I look at the information put out by the state of Connecticut and the Office of OPM, the town of Oline has one of the strongest financial positions in the state of Connecticut. Your fund balance levels are very, very strong. So I don't see any problems from a financial standpoint, at least based on past performance.
As a percentage of
your budget.
The budget.
Exactly.
So if we borrow and our expenses go up because of those borrowings, that may have an impact potentially on the financial.
It could, right. If your budget grows, your reserves should kind of grow in tandem with.
And that's one of the overall issues that we have, because we have a very large project for the schools plus a lot of stuff for the towns. So it may look great right now, but pro forma is another issue.
Absolutely. That's a good point. Going back to number 1 again, this management practices, one thing the rating agencies like to see, especially in a high-rated municipality, is not only looking at your finances now or your debt now, but to kind of look into the future. Say, if these are the projects coming down, what's our debt going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years? What's our finances going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years? And just try and plan for it as best as you can. So if you know a lot of debt is coming down the pike, to try and set aside some reserves ahead of time to help mitigate that impact. But you're absolutely right. But looking to the past, the town has done a very, very good job with its finances. Number 4 is debt management. Again, that's what we're going to touch on today, is looking at your existing proposed debt service. There's metrics in there. They look at debt service as a % of your budget, debt service as a % of your grand list. Because they don't look at the absolute number. As you said, Hartford may have a higher fund balance than Oline, but their budget is much higher. So they always look at percentages. And then number 5 is really not a problem for many smaller municipalities, but it's a problem for many larger municipalities in the state of Connecticut. These long-term liabilities, pension and retiree health care costs, they consume a much larger percentage of the budget in larger municipalities. So those 5 factors determine your bond rating. The third and final component that we look at before we look at debt projections is what I call the foundation. Is what does your existing debt look like now? And I think this is a good chart too, is on page 10. Those blue bars are each fiscal year of Old Lyme's existing debt service. So unlike my mortgage payment, which is the same for 30 years, most municipalities' debt service drops off each year. As you pay off principal, the principal drops and the interest decreases, and you can see it dropping off. So as a municipal advisor, when I talk to communities, the best situation to be in is where you see debt service decreasing. It makes it that much easier to slot in new debt service without a large impact. Now it gets a little touchy sometimes in some communities, especially higher rated municipalities. Like communities like a Cheshire or Newtown or West Hartford, they tend to borrow on an annual basis. And maybe they'll skip a year here or there. But I would assume for the most part, when you put your budget together, or a community like this puts its budget together, I would assume most expenses go up each year. Energy costs go up, wages go up, most costs go up. But there is one thing, debt service, that if a community doesn't borrow, it goes down some years. So one thing that higher rated municipalities sometimes do is they say, listen, we don't have any projects we're doing now, our debt service is going to drop by X amount next year. They'll actually keep their debt service at that higher level, even though it's going to be lower. And they'll take that and they'll put it into a reserve fund, a capital non-recurring fund, a debt service reserve fund. Because they'll look at it and say, listen, even though we're not borrowing now, we know we have to do roads, we have to do schools, we have to do sewers, whatever the case is. And by stating that, that creates a buffer to help mitigate future debt service as it comes down the pike. And as you touched on, the rating agencies like to have you look into the future. And if you know projects are coming down, they like to see you kind of build up a reserve to help mitigate that. But the good story here is that the town's debt service is very low and it's dropping off quickly.
And so you'd only do that preliminary borrowing if you see the interest rates being very favorable at the time, right?
Right. Well, I wouldn't say you borrow soon, but when it comes time to do the budget, and you say, well, what's our debt service? Typically, municipalities lower their debt service budget as their debt service decreases. And that helps to mitigate other increases in the budget, which helps. You'd like to have some. But in reality, when you take money out of the debt service line item, that's money for capital needs that you're taking out, and it's going into other areas of the budget to mitigate that increase. So that when you do have a big project coming down, all of a sudden you have to go back and get that money and bring it back into debt service, which makes it more difficult. Yeah. Other communities say, listen, we know other projects are coming down, so we're going to keep debt service flat and let the rest of the budget fight for itself.
But when you mean keep debt service flat, you're not going to continue to pay a debt that you don't owe, but you're going to take those dollars, those avoided dollars, and put them in a reserve fund.
Exactly. It's a capital non-recurring fund. Now, that's tricky sometimes. Again, some communities say, well, listen, we're looking at too high of a budget increase. We need something to come down. And typically it's debt service. But it's just something to think about going forward here. The town's existing debt is dropping off aggressively, and frankly, it's a good time to slot in something new. And even if you could keep debt service flat, it's probably going to consume a smaller and smaller percentage of your overall budget, because your overall budget, I would assume, is growing at a certain percentage. So if you keep debt flat and your budget's growing, debt is consuming a smaller percentage. So we looked at interest rates, we looked at the town's bond rating and your existing debt. All of those metrics, I think, are relatively positive. So moving on to page 11. It's a little bit busy, but it's a spreadsheet. It shows it's an existing and proposed debt spreadsheet. On the left-hand side, columns B, C, and D is the town's existing debt. And if you look at column E is an important column to me because it shows if the town were to never borrow again, all those numbers are red, meaning your debt service would decrease each year, which is a positive because state law allows a lot of flexibility when you issue debt. And not to pick on any one community, but I worked with Hartford in the past. When Hartford borrowed money before the state had to take them over and we assumed all their debt, Hartford would borrow and they would skip many years of repayment and they would push it out. So we borrow now and let future administrations worry about it. The state ended up having to take them over. You can really get carried away with that. But the good news is, in most communities, they have much more discipline, and the debt service decreases each year. So, on the left-hand side is existing debt. In column F and G and H is a proposed $3 million bond issue for a project. This is just one number that we use. That would be amortized over 20 years. This is just one scenario. You could amortize it over 15 years, over 10 years, over 5 years, however you choose. And, it could be $3 million or $4 million. But in this one scenario, $3 million, I assumed a rate of 3.45, which is very, very conservative, because I just showed you Griswold at a much lower rate than that. So as we go from left to right, we see the total proposed debt service in column H for this new project. And then in column I, it adds your existing debt plus the proposed debt. Adds two columns together. So that would be your new debt in column I. What would happen then on a delta, or from the prior year? What would it look like? So if you go all the way to column J, you would see for fiscal 25, your debt service would go up roughly $40,000. So you could borrow $3 million, and if someone says, well, what would that cost us today? Now, this doesn't include the regional school district. This is just the town itself. Debt service would go up roughly $40,000 next year. Then it would start decreasing again each year after.
And it also assumes that you paid 100% of the project costs with debt, as opposed to taking out anything from the reserve and losing the interest from the reserve.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if you had a reserve and you mitigated that borrowing of the $3 billion, or if you had a reserve set aside to say, hey, listen, we don't need to put that $40,000 into the general fund. We have a debt service fund or a capital non-reserve fund that we could pay that. But this just assumes you build it right into your budget. So if people look at this, they say, okay, what's going to cost for the town to borrow $3 million in today's market? It's like, well, 1 year it goes up $40,000, then it starts decreasing each year after that. To me, it doesn't sound too bad.
Well, it's only part of the answer, right?
Right. We're only scratching the surface. We're not talking about the regional school district, and it's just the cash flow. And if you look at column F, it's level principal that we have for the next 20 years. So what does that look like graphically? If we just turn the next page, it's the exact same data in a visual format. So those blue bars are the debt that the town has already. That's already been borrowed a while ago. Those red bars on top of that, the little bricks, would be the proposed new debt service. And that black arrow there is kind of where your budget is right now for debt service. So it gives you a visual. You have a small little bump in 25, and then it would start decreasing in debt again. I can tell you from working with many other communities, it doesn't always look that way. Some communities say, listen, we don't want any debt at all. Smaller communities have no debt. They're very proud of it. It's good. But then when they call me and say, listen, we need to borrow $3 million. Can you structure it so that it doesn't impact our debt? I say, well, you're starting at zero. I mean, it's going to have to go up. Right? So the fact that you have some debt that's running off, the $3 million can be slotted in with relatively minor impact. Now, say you say, okay, this is great. What if we don't want to go out 20 years? We only want to go out 15 years. On page 13 is the exact same analysis. But if you look at column F, you'll see that instead of going out 20 years, it's only 15 years. So you shorten the term up. In column G, you're paying less interest over 15 years than you would over 20 years. But you're paying a little bit more each year. And if you go from left to right again, surprisingly, it's not that much of an impact, a difference in that first year. You're paying just a small increase, and then that starts to drop off again after that. And if you look at it graphically on page 14, it's very, very similar. Again, you don't have it going out the full 20 years, you're showing 15 years. And again, I think it slots in with minor impact. Again, we're just looking at the town.
With the shorter loan, the annual change number is $36,975, right?
Right.
But with the longer loan, it was more like $39, I think,
Yes, it
right?
was slightly higher, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because I thought it would be the other way around.
Yeah, you're right. This assumes that you issue the bonds in July. or later, July, August, or September. Because if you issue the bonds in July, your first principal payment comes due the following July. You repay principal once a year. So in fiscal 25, you would only have an interest payment. There would be no principal. Not that you would be doing anything wrong, because the principal just comes. Now, if you were to issue the bonds in June, May or June, then you would have a principal payment in next year's budget. Potentially, if you want. So that would have more. But you might say, well, why did you assume that? Again, if you look at column E, in fiscal 25, you have a relatively small decrease in debt service. But if you look at 26, your debt service decrease is almost $300,000. So it slots in perfectly if you wait until after July. But you don't have to. You can do whatever you want. But again, the interest rate thing is just more to do with the weirdness of the U.S. Treasury yield curve. As I said before, it costs Wolcott more to borrow for 1 year than it did Griswold to borrow for 10 years. So it's just a quirk of the way interest rates are working out. But there's very little difference between 15 or 20 years. You just save a lot of interest over the life of the bond issue.
But you're paying more amortization.
You're paying a little bit more each year, exactly. Same thing between a 30-year mortgage and a 15-year mortgage. You save a lot of interest by doing a 15-year mortgage than a 30-year mortgage. But you're paying more each month.
Along the way.
Along the way.
Yeah.
Right. Now, if you want to, on page 15 is the exact same scenario. But this one's over 10 years now. You're saying, hey, listen, we don't want to go out 20 years, we don't want to go out 15 years, we want to go out 10 years. So again, if you look at column F, you'll see that those principal payments now are higher. They're $300,000 a year. And your aggregate interest, the total of column G, is lower than it would be if you did 15 years or 20 years. So now as you go from left to right, you see you still have that relatively modest increase in fiscal 25, but now you also have a modest increase in fiscal 26. Because again, we're shortening the term of that repayment. We're pushing the debt up. Again, I don't live in town, but to me, to borrow $3 million and to only have those relatively minor increases seem not that dramatic. Most other towns I do this with, you see some pretty big spikes when that first principal payment kicks in. Like that column F, when that principal starts repaying, typically you have a big spike in your debt service budget.
But if you're looking at it financially, it costs you a lot more to do a 15-year deal than it does a 10-year deal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
$780,000 versus $536,000.
Right. So it's really up to the town.
So if you're managing expectations for voters or taxpayers, that's one thing over the next couple of years, versus doing something that may be more financially prudent, but you've got to explain something that's a little harder.
No, exactly. No, you're absolutely right. And not to spin out too much on that, but the worst thing to do is to, and I'm just making this up, to borrow for a police car and amortize it over 20 years. Because the life of that police car is not 20 years. Now, conversely, if you're building a new school, an argument can be made, to go out 20 years or even 30 years, because that life of that school should, and it should be multiple generations that help pay for that school if that project's going to last that long. But a police car shouldn't be amortized over 20 years. So I think either of these scenarios, it's really whatever the town is comfortable with, 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years. And then as we go on to page 16, here, it's just a graph of that 10-year, and you can see that the proposed debt is just getting tighter and tighter. But on page 17 is exactly the same scenario, but for $4 million. So they say the project's $4 million and not $3 million. How much does that move the needle? How much does that hurt? And it does a little bit. So for 10 years, for $4 million, as you go left to right, you'll see on the far right-hand column that the first 2 years do increase, a little bit more than they did in the previous scenarios because you're borrowing a larger amount. So as you go up with your borrowing, those first few years are going to feel a little bit more of a bump in the budget before it starts to decrease again. And the graph of that is on page 18. $4 million for 10 years. Now, someone might look at that and say, wow, those are too much of an increase for our budget. So we could, on page 19, is that same $4 million borrowing, but going out 50 years. So these are all kind of very similar scenarios. And again, not to confuse anybody or overwhelm you with scenarios. It's just something that's possible so the town can decide on which option it thinks is the most appropriate. And just some feedback I've seen over the years from different communities. I talk to towns. Some towns look at it and say, listen, try and smooth it out as much as you can so you don't have as much of an impact. Other communities say, whoa, the town approved this project. We want that first year to be is the hardest year possible. So when people say, why is our debt going up? Say, well, we passed this project, you're starting to repay it. That first year hurts. And then after that, have it start decreasing again. So on the continuum, you could say, soften it as much as possible or make that first year hurt as much as possible so that it starts to decrease. Because the worst thing you do, if you smooth it out for, say, 4 or 5 years, 5 years from now, if your debt's still going up, people say, well, why is our debt still going up? Didn't we do this a bunch of years ago? It's like, well, yeah, but we had our advisor push some of it out Harvard style. You know, so you know, you have flexibility. But here, all of these scenarios just show impact in the first 2 years. So this is kind of...
So one thing I want to comment too is that it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about planning. In other words, the reason that we're seeing the kind of fall off of the debt has a lot to do with the debt we currently have, which is falling off. And then if you're looking into the future, whether we have something else, are we going to have something else that's going to come on within that 20-year period or that 15-year period or that 10-year period, that would then be added onto this. But again, the old debt's falling off and you're going to add new debt on top. So a lot of it is the timing of the debt you're taking.
It is, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. And the shorter you keep the term, the more flexibility you have in the future to slot in new debt as it comes down the pike.
Having said that, the point that you made a minute ago, if you stretch the debt out and amortize it over the useful life of the people who are going to enjoy the asset, there's a certain fairness to that. Right. It's not black and white. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking of the school, the senior center too, but the school with generation after generation, and the improvements are going to benefit the next generation and the generation after that. And so for them to continue to pay the debt makes some sense. Right. No, absolutely. Again, I don't think there's an absolute right or wrong answer. It's really what the town decides. You're right. You can say, listen, it's a senior center. Let's go out the 20 years. Let that be paid. And another way to look at it, I try not to get too involved with it, but some people look at it from a present value perspective. You know, those dollars the town pays out 20 years from now are going to be worth less than the dollars you're paying now. So if two people won $1 million in the lottery, and on a budgetary basis, those two people won $1 million. But Martha, if you won $1 million and you got it today, and you won $20 million and you get it 20 years from now, even though you both won $1 million, yours is worth a lot more because you're getting it in today's dollars. You're getting it in dollars 20 years from now. So some people say they lean towards that 20-year option because they say that money that's being paid 20 years from now is going to be worth half as much as it's worth now.
So it's relatively cheaper.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but
all debtors love inflation.
So again, on page 20 is just the last graph that shows just the town's debt service. Now, if you look at the axis on the vertical axis, you know, it caps out at $900,000. And you can make these graphs look differently by changing the axis a lot. But in my opinion, based on other, the town's existing debt, I'm going to use the word, is very modest, and it's paying off aggressively. And this new debt, I think, again, it's just my own editorial, is relatively modest, and it won't have a major impact on the town's budget, whether you do 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years.
The 3 or 4 million that we're talking about.
The 3 or 4 million, right. Now we go to page 21, and we see the debt service for Region 18. So in column B shows the region's existing debt service payments. They're locked into that already. Those are from previous bond issues. And then in column C, I've added the debt service from their comprehensive proposed debt analysis for option 4D. Because there's, I don't know if, I'm assuming people saw that there's a bunch of different scenarios. And that totals $56 million, principal and interest for that scenario. So in column D, I've added those two columns together. Now, I just highlighted a number for my own purpose. Like, I don't know, for fiscal 26, you know, it goes from $2.4 million in 25 to $6.4 million in 26. That just seems like a big jump. But I could be missing something. And then in column E takes 82% of column D, which would be Olime's share of that. So the next set of analysis assumes the town's debt plus the region's debt.
So when column C, I mean, is this based on basically bonding the whole $56 million at one time?
It's based on 37 million.
37 million. That's
I'm
what
sorry,
the payments are
36
going to be.
Well, no, but my point is, are you assuming that you bond it at one point? Like at the start?
That's not the assumption.
No, I think
it's like $7.3 million has already been borrowed, and then there's $34 million for a note, and that gets taken out in 2 years.
Right.
So it's staged is the proposal.
But this schedule is nothing.
Reflected in C, in this column?
This isn't Barry's schedule, this is Ian's schedule. So, and Region 18 has done a whole bunch of scenarios, and this reflects the current inclination of the various scenarios, which is by no means finalized.
Right.
All right.
That's my understanding, exactly.
Right. But I do want to point out that because Barry has added the existing scenario, the 15.8 in the first column, when you go over to the last column and you see the 59.4, that includes the 15.8, which mentally is already included in our annual Region 18 expense. Okay?
Sure.
So we're giving about $29 million this year to Region 18. That already includes this $15 million amortization.
Right, that column B is already, that cake is already baked, right? They've already borrowed
Yes.
that.
Right. And another way to say it is if you take the 59.4, you could subtract about $16 million to see the net addition over the time period based on the Region 18 renovations.
But that existing
okay,
column B, that's the gross, that's not our 82.2%.
Correct.
Right, that's the
That's the
gross.
gross number.
Right, that's the gross number.
That shares
So if you
between us
take
and Lime
82.2%
of
of
that,
16 and
our part of
Well,
that.
that is fair. So we wouldn't subtract 15.8,
Right.
we subtract 82% of it. Yeah.
Right.
You should look at column D then.
Yeah, that's well, really column for us, column E
Right.
is the whole line number.
Right.
Again, what just jumps out at me is just that column E, if you look at fiscal 25, it's 1.98. Let's call it $2 million in fiscal 25. Then in 26, it goes up to $5.2 million. It's just as a municipal advisor, it's like you try and avoid big spikes like that. You know, you just try and smooth it out a little bit. But this is just one scenario, and as you said, it's not set in stone yet. But
Well, it is an odd spike, because then in 27, it goes back down.
it goes back down, right? Which seems a little choppy there.
And David has been looking more carefully at this stuff than Andy and I have. Do you have any insight into why there is that bump for
It's
that
a
year?
product because they're using bonds as opposed to line of credit, like I talked about. So they're borrowing up front for things that are going to happen in the future. So they're paying interest for 6 months on something that they may not expend in 6 months.
They must also have a principal payment in there too from the initial borrowing.
So the way that it's staged is a little funky. And again, trying to structure a construction project with bond financing up front is, I mean, you're going to spend more in terms of interest costs because of the way that they're doing it. And so they're borrowing short-term, to your point, short-term rates are higher than long-term rates. And so they've got $34 million next year that we're going to borrow, not in this budget, but in next year's budget for a year. And then they're going to take it out with long-term bonds. So that's a little bit of the spike. So
It just seems kind of big, though. I mean, let's say for 25, in fiscal 25, let's call it $2 million. So it's going to go up $3.3 million in 1 year. It just seems, I don't want to talk back. It just seems like there's got to be ways to smooth that out a little bit, you know.
Well, that doesn't even include the issuance costs, because every time you issue a note or a bond, it costs you money.
Costs money.
So there are 6 bond or note issuances that we're talking about here, which are anywhere from 50 to 105 grand each, and that's probably a low number. So you total that all up.
Yeah, it's adding a lot.
It adds a lot. But the proposal, that doesn't even include that, because that's supposed to be in the operating budget. So there's like a lot of stuff going on. I think my personal view is they're trying to put a square peg in a round hole by financing this with bonds as opposed to something that would be a little bit more structured upfront as you need to expend. But so it's all in the timing is the reason for the spike.
All right. No, you're absolutely right. And again, we talked about before about a continuum, right? Like you could feel the most pain in year one, or you could smooth it out a little bit. And each town, each region has to find that right amount. But again, a $3 million spike. Now, this is for O-line. That would be a $3.2 million spike in your contribution for debt service for the region, which I don't think includes just their normal increase that they have each year, plus your normal increase that you would have in fiscal 26.
In the second year, they're borrowing $51 million, $17 million long-term and $34 million short-term.
Wow.
That then gets taken out by long-term financing in the subsequent year. So
Are they doing the short-term, David, because of the reimbursement of the 22, the grant that they got?
I don't know.
Okay.
And if that's the case, then there are other mitigating factors potentially. So.
Yeah. So beginner question, do we have any say in how they structure their...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And generally speaking, are there other ways to mitigate this huge increase?
Well, I think so. There's no magic wand, but as you said, like sometimes if there's a big bond issue coming, I forget the exact number you said, 30 million, 40 million. Sometimes you could bifurcate it or chop it into pieces to say, okay, instead of doing 35 million, we're going to do 15 million, and then we'll do the other 15 million next year, spread it out a little bit. Or, not to pick on Hartford again, not that it would be bad, but if you're building the school, perhaps looking or just exploring, and I don't think I saw that in any of the scenarios, perhaps going out over 20 years for the life of the bond issue. Now, some people say, wait a minute, we're going to pay a lot more interest over if we go longer than 20 years. But I would assume that that project, I don't know for sure, that an argument can be made that it could extend the maturity to help mitigate a $3.2 million increase.
That's why I opened with the question of whether you were advising the school board or not. Mm-hmm. So Lime, they don't issue bonds, right?
Right.
So Old Lime issues bonds.
Right.
Or notes, or bank loans, that sort of thing.
Right.
So does the school. It would be nice to have like one person advising. So
Yeah.
Or two people working collaboratively.
However it works, but it hasn't happened. So we're kind of guessing, and I looked at a page of numbers. I don't know what is going on.
But at a minimum, I don't want to spend. But whenever you're talking to someone at the district, the school business manager or something, say, I'm just curious. We're looking at this scenario 4D. It's like Old Lime's debt service is going to go up $3.2 million. Is that? Are we all on board? I mean, is that the region's? I mean, is there another option to?
I think it would be important to understand where that $22 million grant reimbursement, whatever, is playing into the scenario. Like, have we asked that question?
That's a smaller question, though, than somebody's got to have control of this in toto, because this $3 or $4 million ain't what we need in town.
Right.
We've got 2 other pretty large projects as well that may require some financing too.
Yeah, so I think that we should request with Ian to schedule a meeting with the financial advisor, and you and me and Andy and Alan Chinas and whoever else, ask these questions.
Yeah, whether it's me or somebody else, yeah, but it needs to be better coordinated than it has been, in my personal view.
And just, again, from doing this for a long time, just my own opinion, I looked at that analysis. It was very comprehensive that they put together, but sometimes, you could overwhelm people with 100 different scenarios, right? These numbers are going all over, and you brought up a good point. I actually missed that. A lot of them had already embedded that existing debt. So all these numbers are going on, sometimes like, whoa, let's just take it easy. Under the scenario that you guys, the regional school districts, are planning to do, how does Old Lime's debt service look like? Just one column, by fiscal year, what does it look like?
They want to get a project done.
But I mean, if your debt's going to go up $3.2 million, I would assume that's going to leave a mark. I mean, I don't know, maybe. But so just to just take that scenario 4D, right, and just say, okay, well, let's look at it. If they say, yeah, that's what we're going to do, 4D, that's what we're doing. So let's go to page 22 and say, okay, well, what does that look like in conjunction with your $4 million proposed borrowing? So again, existing debt is on the left-hand side. Your $4 million project is in column F, and I'm assuming it goes out 15 years. And then we add a new column, column I, called the town's 82.2% share of Region 18's debt service, assuming option 4D. And you can put in any option you want. You guys could do this yourself. So as we go from left to right, your proposed debt service, your existing and proposed with the region's debt is in column J. So what happens from year to year? I hate to use the word ugly. It looks a little ugly because, just simply because it jumps so much in 26 and then it drops $1.2 million. I mean, why would it drop $1.2 million after you just went up $3.3 million? It doesn't make sense. It's like, we'll soften that $3.3 million and move some of it to the next year so that it's a little bit.
I'll tell you why, because they're borrowing $34 million for 21 years, not 20 years. When you look at their scenario, but you haven't seen their scenario. So, yeah.
No, he has.
Well, yeah, I saw those, but
but you just took the numbers.
I just took the numbers,
yeah,
right?
You weren't evaluating it, yeah.
And Barry, the column I, the 59,400, that includes the current debt, the Region 18's current debt plus the new debt.
Right.
Times 82%.
Yes, it does. I know we talked about.
Yeah. So it's the existing debt plus the new debt.
Yes.
All of this isn't an increase.
Right, but just like this analysis includes your existing debt service too in column B. So it includes existing and proposed for the town and existing and proposed for the region. Mm-hmm. And it looks a little choppy there at that last column, right? You got some big increases and big decreases. Mm-hmm. Just seems like by moving some of that debt in that's going to hit in fiscal 26 to move it out to fiscal 27, that would help soften that increase. It's like a roller coaster, right? You're going up, you're coming back down again, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But that's kind of the purpose of doing these scenarios, and to try and keep it as simple and straightforward as possible, as opposed to overwhelming someone with 100 different scenarios. And again, just graphically, and this is the last chart that I have, one thing that jumps out at me on page 23, the last page, is, I hate to say it, but the town's debt on the bottom is really insignificant in comparative to the region. Whether you do 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years, it doesn't move the needle. It's really the region that's moving the needle here.
Yes.
Well, but that's a foregone conclusion. Our school budget is about 3/4 of our total budget.
Wow. Yeah.
And it continues.
So again, just I could help kind of run some more scenarios if you talk to the region and say, listen, after talking to them, they're leaning towards maybe a different scenario. It's really not a lot of work. We could just kind of drop it into that last page.
If you just take the final numbers.
The final numbers, right. And again, I would just recommend to keep it simple with them. Say, listen, I know you've got 100 different scenarios and numbers all over the place, but kind of just give us what your existing and proposed debt service is looking, you, the region, which one do you think you're leaning towards, so that we could build it in, just to try and mitigate a $3 million increase in 1 year, to try and chop it. Does that make sense? A little bit? And that's the purposes of these scenarios, to try and get a planning of it, so that you could budget ahead and try and manage the impact, which seems like it's coming within the next couple of years here. Now, this does not include any additional borrowing besides the $3 or $4 million. Now, if you say, hey, listen, we got another project 3 years from now for $3 or $4 or $5 million, you could add it on. And again, communities, like a West Hartford or a Newtown or Cheshire, they have a 5 and 10-year capital plan. So that they're looking out 5 to 10 years, and they try and prioritize these projects. But I know, being part of a regional school district, you don't have a lot of control. When that debt comes, it comes, and you just have to fit that in. And that's a big factor here in your budget. So hopefully this helps give you a little bit of light on things. But it seems like it's really the region and which option they choose is really going to determine the town's debt service impact. But if it wasn't for them, the new debt would slot in perfect.
The damn kids that we've got to educate.
It doesn't help matters, but I can tell you, I work with a couple other regional school districts, like Region 4, I know is looking at a big project, Region 16, Region 1, which is out. And typically, it does happen with regional school districts. I know I'm simplifying it a little bit, but what I see is they do a bond issue 15 or 20 years ago that's been paying off over time. They've been deferring capital, and then all of a sudden they come in and say, listen, we cannot defer it anymore. We have to do a big school project. What can you do to kind of mitigate the impact of the member towns? And it is kind of tough. If you don't borrow for a period of time and your debt comes down quite a bit, and then you do a big project, it's hard to slot that in. It impacts the member towns, especially the member towns that have the largest share of the regions.
You don't paint your house every 5 years. After 20 years, you're going to have to build a new house.
Exactly. The whole thing, by deferring that, and it's kind of ironic to say this. Like, I work with the city of Stamford, too. It's hard to believe. Stamford borrows each year between $20 and $40 million a year. So when I tell that to people, they go, wow, their debt service must go up a lot. And ironically, it doesn't. Because they've been doing this for so long that their runoff each year is a lot in new debt. So it's strange. It works better. This analysis works better when a community actually borrows more, because as the debt comes down, you layer it in and it stays relatively flat. But if you're a regional school district and 18 years have gone by and you have 2 years left on your debt service, and then they say we need another big, it reminds me of a roller coaster. It starts high, it comes down, and then it rolls back up again, and then it comes back down. Yeah. Where it seems like it would make more sense if they just kind of did it a little bit more incrementally, over 3 or 4 or 5 years, as opposed to waiting for 20 years. Then you see these big spikes up and down. So I did a lot of talking. Hopefully it made sense a little bit. Again, if you get a different scenario, we could slot it in. I could pass it on, and you could kind of see how it looks.
Anybody have any questions for Barry? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your time. Hopefully it made sense. And
I have one question. How long is the process again? You try to go on. How long does it take the project to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, so if the town were to say, listen, we do want to do a $3 or $4 million bond issue, it's about, from start to finish, it's about 3 months. Because frankly, it's been a while since the town itself did a bond issue. We have to prepare for an official statement, which is a disclosure document. We have to meet with the rating agencies, and that whole process is 3 months. So do you have a timeline when you think you would want to issue the $3 or $4 million for the? Is it?
Well, we have Martha always worries about it and loses sleep. We have enough money in the checkbook to pay for the immediate expenses that we have to pay for the senior center renovation project. But we don't want to take it out of the checkbook, I think. So my answer to your question is, as soon as we figure out what we want to do, we ought to get going, but there's not an emergency.
Okay. Because like I said, just keep in mind, say, hey, listen, it is a 3-month process, so just try and say, okay, keep that in mind. You say, we need money in the bank, it takes 3 months to do it.
So we the question for the senior center.
Yep.
For the district, that bond issue goes through the district, so they would answer that question, right?
Oh, in terms of when they need the money, yeah, but it's really not in the coming fiscal year, but the following fiscal year that hits.
Yep. Okay.
The other thing, too, that Martha has brought up a number of times is we do have more than one project. And so in toto, this number may be $3 or $4 million. We do have some cash, but we want to keep that kind of 15-ish% is what we've been told of budget, in the kitty.
All right.
And so a smaller deal, we don't want to do 3 deals over the next 24 months, because that's a little bit of,
Right. You
paper
don't want to
cuts.
do that. You want to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
If we can coordinate.
If you could, right?
Yeah. And so the cost of doing a smaller issue, is there a break point where, oh my gosh, they're borrowing $10 million and the cost goes down because it's more liquid or anything like that, or not really?
No, from the investors, whether you borrow 3 or 4 or 10 million, you're going to get about the same interest rate. But you do have issuance costs, right? So if you do a bond issue now and then you end up doing another one next year, you end up paying everybody twice.
Right.
So sometimes it makes sense to try and put them together. However, again, I always think of it as a continuum. We looked at these scenarios. If you borrow 3 or 4 million, you could slot it in with very little impact to your existing budget. But if you say, listen, we're going to combine another 3 or 4 million for another project and another 3 or 4 million for another project. So now all of a sudden it's 10 million. It's harder to slot in that 10 million with minimal impact than it is with 3 or 4 million. But again, it doesn't seem like the town's debt is your problem. It's really the region's debt that's going to really move the needle in the budget impact, right? Does that make sense when you look at the charts?
Yeah.
Now, if you have a $3 million increase from the region, hypothetically, and then you borrow another 10 million, you wouldn't want them to both hit at the same time. You want to try and time it so that those...
I don't think we're going to have an option, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because it seems like 26 is when the region's debt is going to hit the town's budget.
I
So,
think we have to work a little bit more collaboratively on how we're going to do this with minimal impact on the taxpayers. It's not cut and dry,
right.
and they don't get to call all the shots.
I'm just curious, that project at the region, is it a major renovation, like is it an addition to the school?
Renovation of 4 schools and renovation of 3 schools and an addition on 1 school.
Okay.
Basically,
Mainly air conditioning and heat systems in the 3 schools,
and they're
And the
thinking...
fire
fire suppression, security.
Seems kind of high for just HVAC. I don't know much. I don't know anything about construction.
Preaching to some of the choir.
That's how much,
We're showing up late.
but it's not going to cost that much either.
Are they eligible? You mentioned a grant, so those amounts there. I'm just curious.
Those are net.
So the renovation...
Those are the net costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, the renovation at the one school that's the addition gets to renovate as new reimbursement. And then we've got another $20 million from the state in grant.
No, 10.
10.
The 10 is for the
But you got to renovate it.
renovation as new, and then there's another 10 for the air conditioning. There's an air conditioning grant for the other 4 schools. So the total 57 million project gross, the net cost to the towns is about 36.
But you got to borrow
You gotta
up
borrow
front
the
to get
whole
the
thing.
reimbursement,
Uh-huh.
right? So that's that 1 year where you've got $51 million of debt because you're waiting to complete the project
Right.
to get your $10 million reimbursement from the
Wow.
state.
But they haven't gotten all the money back from the high school yet.
No.
Well, it would be nice if they could find a piece of that.
That's tied up because they couldn't take out another project unless they closed that out. So I know that they had to send some paperwork back in because they said they lost it at the state. But I thought that they were pretty close to tying that up.
I've heard some horror stories up there with a lot of the state with the retirement and the turnover, that a lot of these projects don't get closed out in time, and they just sit there for year after year. And then as people change, as administrations change, it just gets worse, right? Because the state loses track, things drag out. It's supposed to be done in a couple of years. I've seen some of them drag out 5, 7 years.
With 10 years.
10.
It's been 10 since the high school
Longer
project.
now, and plus the state CapEx guy is probably
That's
going
what this money is here.
So there's that.
Yeah.
You have to ask for the
gotta
reimbursement,
ask
which we
for it.
didn't do for 10 years, so there's
And
that.
then the state might ask for, well, you had a change order, do you have that?
That's what
And
held
like,
ours
well,
up.
how could you find that? And
Yeah.
then, you get in a bad situation
Yeah.
sometimes.
You have to bird dog it, but it was $1 million, so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully this was helpful. I wouldn't mind, if you get a different scenario, say we talk with the region, here's what it looks like. But I would recommend, stand up. If you see a year where debt goes up $3 million, and say, well, listen, is there another option where you could kind of soften that a little bit? Or seems like a reasonable.
Yeah, we have to talk about it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Pleasure meeting you all. Got a beautiful town here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anita, would you join us up here? Did you make copies of this sheet that we worked on?
Yes.
I want to, we circulated this. This is just a simpler and therefore, I think, easier way to get our views around the order of
But if you also
magnitude.
look at that one, and you look at his new schedule, it changed, so I updated it.
Oh, I'm not looking at his, I'm just looking at ours.
Yeah, the one that you had me do?
Yeah.
The one that you had me do is if you look at his schedule in the book, it changed one of the numbers.
What's
It
that?
changed our number, so I updated it. Want to look at it quickly?
Tell me what numbers.
Yep, it changed the senior center, it starts with 65 now.
Do you have enough to
Yeah.
share?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I just,
Oh, 65 rather
yeah,
than?
look at his 4D, or his 4.
Uh-huh,
Okay, thank you.
that's fine.
So that was the only line
Is
that
that the only one that
from the
changed?
numbers that you gave.
Did you get what? There's my word. I have it.
Yeah, but see this changed because of here,
You guys both have?
here,
Yes,
65.
go ahead. Yeah.
And 69 is changed today, so that's the new.
This is the change.
That's what the change he did in here,
Okay.
65.
I think Ian also said.
Oh, was that changed?
Ian
I-
said change 2 today.
Well, this isn't a fine focus.
High level, right.
Number, this
Yeah.
is order of magnitude.
I think we have it. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Coming
I think that
Oh, wait a
Ian
minute, I might have some,
Ian
I might have
said you impact the town today.
Oh, that's right, April 1st, that gives us the percentage.
Perfect. We'll get it.
Perfect.
What was the total enrollment of that number?
I don't have it in front of me, and I can't get it on the computer. I'm
That's 1,640 kids, though, I don't think.
No way.
I can look and see if I can get it on.
It's like 1,200 kids, right?
Yeah, but it's, percentage is the key,
Right.
that live in Old Lyme. And that date that said is today.
Currently, it's,
We go down?
Renovation is basically.
no, I think we're going up next year to
1,640 kids.
82.4. I think their estimate was. We're 82.1.
Wow.
Well, this has 82.2.
That couldn't have been accurate, because it's
Right,
April
right, I
1st,
know, because
yeah.
it was
No, we're
determined, but it
at
couldn't be too far.
82.2 now, but I think next year, I thought the estimate said 82.4.
Well, I don't want to worry about the fractions. And I want to focus the discussion for what we have to do tomorrow on the schedule for the Board of Finance is to come to a conclusion regarding what are our expenditures going to be for next year and what is the mill rate going to be to finance those expenditures, to prepare us for an information session with the town on the 15th of April and then a vote in May to either approve the budget or not. So the hit for this coming fiscal year that we've been working on, 24-25, is not serious with respect to the school and the senior center. Those two projects are going to whop us in the following year and thereafter. But I wanted to see what those numbers look like to inform us what do we want to do for the coming year, right? And this is just kind of a quick overview, and let me walk you through it. Anita has started with the budget for this year, which you'll see the first column, 24-25, total expenditures of $42 million. And then debt, the current debt, this is already in the budget, of $431. If we issue senior center bonds pursuant to I think we took a 20-year, $4 million at 3.45% for 20 years. So $4 million amortized over 20 years, the $65,000 payment. So it could be 50, it could be 75, not material.
No, because according to the book, he said that you told him that you wanted to do the $4 million debt at 15 years. That's why I went to 65. Okay, sorry.
No, I didn't, but it doesn't matter. It's immaterial. But as you see, the budget increase for this year on debt isn't substantial, maybe the $65,000. But then, what I would look at then are the succeeding years, when the senior center goes up from 65 to 395, and the Board of Education, and this is just new money. The existing $15.8 million, our share of that, is included up above in RSD 18, $29 million, $30 million, $31 million. So that covers the existing debt. This is just new debt. So according to that scenario 4D, our share of the Region 18 renovation expense for the 25-26 fiscal year would be $3.6 million. This is what we've been worrying about. Why did it jump up so much? And then it would go down the following year to 2.4 and so on. But sort of the bottom line is we have millions of dollars of increases in tax burden coming down the pike in the next few years that won't tail off for a number of years. So, what do we do? What do we do with the mill rate kind of thing? Anita, do you know what is our surplus right now? The surplus balance?
No, the auditors are still working on it.
And Dave, you estimated it about 10.8 or 11 million?
In the
Yeah,
draft
that
figures,
that
yeah, it
was-
was, 10.883 was the unassigned general fund balance at June 30th.
Right,
So
and
that-
then
That doesn't include any dollars in the special fund?
No.
That's right.
Okay, but when we talk about, every year we look at the budget and what the taxes are going to be, and we ask ourselves the question, should we mitigate the tax impact by taking some money from surplus? And that's the question we have to answer tomorrow. And the starting point is, well, how much surplus do we have? And our assumption for tomorrow was about 10.8.
correct. That's the safe one.
10.9, if you want the extra.
Oh, it rounds up to 10.9?
It does, we'll take whatever we can get.
10.9, we'll take whatever we can get.
Before you roll, so yeah, it's close enough. And currently, and I was just looking at numbers again today, and I'm going to go back through them again tomorrow. Currently, with everything that was talked about in all the meetings, it looks like if you take no money from fund balance, there'll be an increase of 0.85 mil. So less than 1 mil. As we stand right now with the budget.
Well, you say if we take no money from fund balance, but if we take money from the fund balances that we agreed to take last week?
Those are the designated funds.
No, those are designated funds. No one
Oh,
can
you
take
mean
from
no money from the surplus?
No one can get it.
If we take money from the places we intend to take it from, we'll have a deficit, and the deficit...
It was, like I said, I got approximately 0.85, so less than 1 mil.
How many dollars?
if you took,
851,267?
Is that right?
That'd be pretty close.
I was playing around with a couple, because I got a couple.
Because isn't a mill
in,
1.2
so I
million?
changed a couple of them. So it's an approximate, yeah.
That's the difference between your total expenditures
The numbers changed to.
and the total estimated revenues, right? So maybe it's off a tiny bit.
Yeah, estimated revenues,
So if we
a little
wanted
bit
to
more.
keep taxes completely flat, and let's assume that the grand list also is flat, we would need to draw $850,000 from the surplus to do that. Correct. That's your question for tomorrow night?
And I have it,
Right.
I just, yeah, I will have it for you tomorrow. I just want to go through the numbers like one more
Yeah,
time.
and let us know how much is a mill worth, right?
Yes,
How many dollars per mill?
I already have it on the,
Okay, because, I mean, my own view is that it would be better to increase our mill rate a little bit this coming year than twice as much in the second and third and fourth years, and to preserve our surplus. But we can talk about that tomorrow.
So we allocated for this current year's budget, was it $600,000 out of the surplus?
this current year, you're at 600, yes.
And in past years, we've done that, and honestly, we have not spent it. That money has ended up being returned to the town.
Well,
So, and I know we don't even have our audit from last year finalized yet. Normally, we would have that, so we would know how much, if any, of that money from last year was returned to surplus. Who knows? Maybe we're at 11.5 million in the undesignated fund.
right.
Because we don't have our June 30th number yet. Any idea as to when we'll have that?
I've been promised, I spoke with him last week, and he said, hopefully I should have it next week.
Which is this week.
No,
Week
next
after.
Week after.
Historically, how much is that? Historically, how much is that out of that? What percentage gets returned?
Well, in the past,
Depends on collection.
depends on collections, it depends on interest income, which I don't know if we were over last year or not.
Yes.
We did raise
Yes, last year
we
we-
did raise the collection estimate, though, for this year, so I think that number will be smaller than it has been in past years.
But in the past, we've allocated money out of surplus to offset the mill rate increase, and I don't recall any time of us actually spending part of
There
that.
was one year that we even collected
Yeah.
it.
Returned it.
And
So,
that's
not that we can count on that.
No,
because
but
we
it's
don't
a
know.
function of the fact that, at least in the past number of years in my recent memory, we've always come in better than budget. Revenues have been a little higher and expenses have been a little lower, so we've grown the surplus every year. And hopefully, we'll continue to do that, so that the picture that we're looking at today will be a little rosier in 2 or 3 years if we continue to grow the surplus every year. But that's not a certainty.
The other thing that impacts that fund balance is
No, you're not.
how many dollars have we allocated in this current fiscal year at town meeting or by the Board of Finance? Because all that money,
52, I want to say it was 51.7 or 50.
it's like $52,000.
It was less than we've done.
Do we have anything that we're going to have to allocate at town meeting, senior center, which we don't know where that money's going to come
You're
from,
gonna have
but-
to also allocate for Downview parking lot.
which is going to be approximately,
I have no idea.
I mean, are we talking 50,000, 150,000, 200,000?
I'm gonna say 30.
Okay. I mean, that just gives us an idea as to where it is. It's not
But I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
but it's not 500,000.
not $500,000
Paving,
or something like
we're
that.
paving like 5 parking.
Yeah,
parking
okay.
spaces
No, I'm just,
and 2 sidewalks.
because in past years, there's been hundreds of thousands of dollars of
Yeah.
extra allocations voted on at town meeting that have taken money out of the surplus. So this year is very small, which puts our surplus in
Better shape.
better shape. Whether we spend any to offset this mill rate or save it for the
26.
$5.2 million
Yeah, that's-
whack we're gonna take.
You're in the same place if you do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the ADA compliant project, that money is coming from somewhere else? Or
No,
That's from,
that would have to come from,
That's,
that was gonna be a
that's
lot.
the 50,000 or
that's
so we were talking
that's
about from
the
Soundview.
paving of the Soundview parking lot, just the area that we need to
Right.
get our handicap spots in correctly. So we were there today with the in-town engineer, and then just
'Cause
Tim.
there's the porta potty and all that and stuff like that.
It's all taken care of, but then, and then there's Berry Road that we might be over 20, but we're hoping not. So that's the other, so 50 more maybe between those two projects between now and June.
So what I'm anticipating for tomorrow is that Anita will give us a hard number for total expenditures and a projection of total revenues. We'll see the difference. And, well, it's not just that. We have to compare the grand list. Did the grand list go up as of October 1st materially, do you know? In other words, we'll need
No,
to...
she sent out the numbers for the grand list, what was it?
Whatever it is, then we'll have to look at the grand list and see.
1.605, she sent out because it got revised a couple times.
But how did that compare to last year?
That's up
It was up.
I thought it was a slight decrease.
$35 million.
No, it was up.
Anyway, we have to take the grand list,
Right, I think or something like that.
multiplied by the mill rate,
Oh, okay, 159,
project
I was
dollars,
on
and look at
yeah,
the
wait, I saw
expenses.
18, okay, 159.
BJ, one thing
Yeah,
that I
no,
think is
it's-
kind of nice that I don't know we'll have is, and we have for the town meeting is like, for a typical house that costs like $400,000.
We give examples
what
every
does
year.
that mean if
Right.
you got, I think that's helpful for people
If
to
you do
understand.
it, every mill is $1, not a dollar, or
Do
85
you think
cents.
that
So
the
if you did
aggregate,
$1.
the aggregate residential property has gone up in the last 5 years?
Sorry? It's an artifact.
Past 5
But that's
years,
the
yeah.
thing.
So we're gonna have to
And
be
it's
now.
illustrative, so people can, but I understand that.
Well, it's assessed value.
Yeah, I understand the
Right,
concept.
no,
That hasn't changed. Every time you assess
It's cool, yeah, that's right, assessed value.
Forget.
That'll change.
And if we want to.
Every 10 years?
I think so.
Assessed values go up.
Andy,
Could come down a little.
for full
Spain.
now, is it every 10 years? And every 5 years, it's a statistical?
I think it's 5 is statistical, 10 is full.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have a full
I
district.
guess what helps is if the grand list increases.
So, another thing that on the right.
Or people's homes appreciate more than their
Change
something.
the budget, because we decide on the budget. If it does raise everybody's house value on average 10%, then people should understand they should pay 10% more in taxes, because they have the house that's worth.
Well, the mill rate should go down 10%.
Yeah.
No, the mill rate should go down if we hold the expenses
Right.
constant, but we can't do that, right? We can't do that because our expenses rise. All I'm saying is, if you have a house that's worth 10% more than mine, I expect you to pay 10% more in taxes.
Yeah.
And if I-
Unless you're retired and you're on a fixed income and...
I'm not saying people like it. Anyway, I'm just putting that into the mix as a possible way to justify more tax dollars in the next 2 or 3 years.
The nice thing is, we'll get some projects done this year, and then we'll have a senior center, and then we may not get other projects done, but
Right.
we'll have,
Keep your fingers crossed interest stays up.
yeah.
It'll be really good.
But we'll,
Anything else from
You want them to
anybody?
go up or down? Wait a second, we're borrowing money here.
No, we want interest to go up. For our money,
10 million.
Our borrowing costs will go up.
we want that to go down.
Oh, okay, let's do that.
How can you have it both ways?
are you guys good?
Wishful thinking.
Oh, there you go.
So I'm going to talk to Martha.
What's your economics?
Absolutely right, yeah.
BJ, I talked to him after our meeting on Friday.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And
That's
sit
a
down and
perfect
say,
idea.
I think we show him
Yeah,
our,
we've got the
our
monthly meeting on
section,
Friday.
and say, okay, you gotta wait for that.
And it's not to criticize
No,
them.
it doesn't just have the senior center.
I feel like that's the big, that hangs.
Glad you want all your stuff.
sewer.
Got our stuff as well.
It's a big question mark.
Well,
Like,
the town has approved.
no, we don't, no, I mean, the last number we have is from like 5 years ago.
How much the town-
19 million.
The question is, how do we do it in a way that?
No, that's the thing, it could be anything.
My point is, what's going
It won't be nothing, but it could be anything.
is not
Yeah.
everything.
And it might happen
town
at any time.
would or should
Probably not.
It's not gonna happen.
It's actually more modest than the
It could be 2 years, it could be another 10.
town.
Right.
Well, so just,
I think it's just sound that we have to take a look.
I don't know where that came from.
Things that we need to.
Everybody got a copy?
Yeah, well, they're talking,
yeah, with Alan too.
do you want to adjourn here so that people
Yeah.
know? Thank you.
Are you gonna make a motion to adjourn?
She can't. I'll
You
second.
can suggest it, though.
There's, who made the motion?
David did, I
David,
seconded
okay.
it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
This sheet that came around.
Thank you.
With the other projects, where did that come from, and are there more
That
copies?
came from me,
Okay,
Oh.
and it's a draft.
okay,
So
all
I
right,
didn't get that.
okay.
Do you have another copy?
I'd just like to talk to
Okay.
just did it tonight, so
Okay.
I'd like to
All
talk
right.
to Andy and BJ first, and then I'll
That's fine.
circulate.
I didn't know
What
where.
it basically does is tries to figure out how much cash we have available if we're going to stick at the 15%, which is very important for our credit rating, and backs into it. So, but it's extremely preliminary. So.
Well, if you say stick to it, we're way above that now. If we're gonna reduce.
Right.
Yeah, we're,
I wouldn't say way above it.
We're way above 15 right now.
Yeah, so-
15%, but what does that mean in absolute dollars?
Right.
$4 million. So we've got senior center, and then we've got other projects as well.
Yeah.
So the idea is, how much money do we want to actually finance?
Right.
Versus taking out of the kitty? Because that number's gonna go down. If our budget goes up 10%,
Right.
we have
Right.
that much less available if we
Percentage of-
15% kind of.
Right, yeah, right, then 15% becomes a higher number.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
great.
So anyway, I will finalize that
No, we're.
individually, and then I'll share
Oh,
that
yes,
with
that's-
everyone.
Go.
Yeah,
Go
thank
get
you.
them. Here, 7:05 tomorrow night.
Yeah.
A short night, though.